I'm hoping that we'll get through some of this enough and have some time for some questions and answers. And I want to try to take us through some steps that we have learned over the last 16 years that we've been doing this at our church in LifeBridge. And at the end of the day, for me, I'm a pastor of a church. I'm pragmatic. I want the church to be effective and to be honoring to God and for people to come to know Him. And so some of the things that we've done in this, though, has been really pushing our church out into our community, kind of getting outside the four walls. And one of the things that we have a good friend of ours who is an atheist guy. I really think he's probably more agnostic than he is atheist, but he claims he's atheist. Doesn't know what he believes about God at all, doesn't believe there is a God. But he went and visited 100 churches and wrote a book, When Casper Goes to Church. It was fascinating to listen to him. And it's in that first slide right there. If we'll just kind of, John, jump up to that. And what he discovered was that when he would sit in services, the question he asked my friend, one of the guys on our staff, was this: is this what Jesus really told you guys to do? From his perspective as an outsider walking in, sitting in a worship service, sitting in a service on a weekend, I realize how that works for the non-Christian person to come in. Because if we're not careful, we've got our language down, right? We got our code. If I were to say to you all, hey, this afternoon we're going to gather around the Lord's table, what would that mean? It's a word you didn't take communion here in South Africa ever. It would be communion time, right? It would be, we know that. Now, to the person walking in the door, when they hear that, we're going to gather around the Lord's table, they're doing a couple things. They're looking for a table, first of all. They're wondering how they're all going to get around that table, should they find it. And how did I know that was the Lord's table? Did he, build it and send it? I mean, there's a lot of language we use that's so natural for us, but the outsider doesn't hear it that way. It doesn't connect in. So when Jim would go to church and visit churches, he honestly, there wasn't anything about it that left him thinking, well, that's something that I'd want to be a part of, except for two churches he went to. One in Southern California, one in Chicago, where he visited, and they were talking that weekend about what they were doing to make a difference for the people in their community. And he said, if I were going to go to church, I would go to one like that one. Because there was something in him that connected that to God. Somehow he thought that was a God. Somehow he thought if Jesus were who he claimed to be, this would be the stuff he would be doing. And so I thought it was fascinating for us to think about some of the ways we've gotten locked into the stuff we're doing. What if success were defined by life change? What if we were defining success by not just how many people are coming, but what kind of life change is happening for people? What kind of what's happening in their lives that's different? What's the difference in them becoming followers? Now, there's a big argument today about attractional and missional going on. I don't know if that's hit over here or not, but it's a big issue in the U.S. And are we just an attractional church, where we keep trying to do stuff to get people to show up, or are we a missional church? We're really going to try to be the hands and feet of Jesus. And the way I look at the book of Acts is the church was attractional and missional. It was both. It was trying to find ways to open doors for people to be a part, and it was sending them back out to do ministry and to be a part of what God was doing. So here's a question. Last night I shared with you the driving question for me in the early 90s as we were growing was this question: if our church disappeared, would anybody care? Would anybody in the community notice we were gone? And that led us to some other questions. And one of those questions was this, and I think it's a better question. The question that a lot of churches are asking is, how do we be the best church in the community? How is it that we could be the best church in the community? In other words, how do we have the best preaching? How do we have the best worship? How do we have the best facilities? How do we have the best student and children's stuff going on? We want to be the best church in town. Now, nobody would say that, but a lot of church growth emphasis is around how do we be the best church in the community. And we're suggesting that there's a change to that question. What if you were asking, how do we be the best church for the community? Not in the community, but for the community. And there's a huge completely different set of answers to that question of what does it mean to be the best church for the community? What would that look like? What would it look like if we were to be engaged in our city and we were the best church for the community? What would transpire? What would be different about what you're currently doing? What would look remarkably different? So we created a little chart here, and I want to show it to you very quick, and there's other ways for us to pick this up, but where are you as a congregation, wherever your church is at, wherever you're located, whatever city you're in, there are churches that are very strong on proclamation and other churches that are strong on demonstration, okay? Good deeds and good news. Now, the Bible talks about good deeds and good news kind of hand in hand, but we've tended to separate them. Now, there are some churches that are down in this white box that they're internal in both. They're about taking care of the people. They're about building up the saints. For them, it's very much focus about teaching truth, caring for our own. They're really not much salt or light. There are churches, though, that if you go to the blue box, they're very external about their good deeds, about serving the least, transforming the community, a lot about grace. There's a lot about, show them a lot of light, maybe not a lot of salt. If you go to the yellow box, and this is a large part of evangelical Christianity, we are big on saving the lost. We are big on proclamation of the gospel. Tell them. All I'm suggesting is that I believe the biblical model is the combination of those where it's saving the lost and serving the least. It is show and tell. It is salt and light. It is grace and truth that we're sharing. It is proclamation and demonstration. What I would suggest, though, is that one of the shifts we've seen, at least in our part of the world, is that people are looking for you to show them before they're looking for you to tell them. And I'm going to get to a bit of why I think this can be evangelistic for us, but there's a kind of a cause and effect thing that's going to happen here together in this. And so for us, this is really about this circle of change that goes on in a person's life. John, if you'll flip up for me. So how do we see life change in the volunteers and life change in the people we're serving? So when we're asking somebody to be a mentor in the public school system, and somebody signs up to it, here's what they're doing. They're just doing tutoring. You don't have to be a believer to tutor a kid. You don't have to be a believer to hang out with a kid and encourage them and invite them and challenge them. But here's what we say to our volunteers. We want you to see this as a God thing. We want you to see this as a kingdom thing. So we want you to pray for that child and their family. We want you to look for ways to connect with them relationally. We want for you to lift this up and see this as a different thing. And so when we're talking to our volunteers, here's one of the things we say at our church. Whether you volunteer inside our church or outside our church doesn't matter to us, as long as you're intentionally honoring God and serving the needs of somebody else. And so if you're a soccer league coach for kids, how do you turn that into a kingdom thing? If you're a volunteer in the school, how do you turn that into a kingdom thing? Because people in the church are already serving in a lot of different ways. We just want to incorporate that because somehow, here's what we've said in the church. When we say service, what we often mean is serve us. We need so many people to help in the children's area, and we need so many small group leaders, and we need a whole bunch of people to work with our students. And here's what we say, if you're not serving in the church, you just don't love Jesus. And what I'm trying to do is take what people are doing and have a passion for, have a heart for, and just lift that up and elevate that as a God thing, as a kingdom thing. And help them see that, because what we're looking for is for life change in them and life change in the people that they're serving. Externally focused churches, whatever you want to use the word, missional, externally focused, was just language we landed on kind of before we knew anything about missional language. They're not defined by geography, they're not defined by location, size of the city, rural or urban, they're not defined even by theology or denomination. It is a value we get to choose. And are we choosing to find ways to be the hands and feet of Christ? When you watch the early church, they were regularly looking for ways to meet the needs of of their communities. It was interesting, in 1914, it's assumed that Lenin outlawed Christianity from Russia. But he didn't. He didn't outlaw Christianity. What he outlawed was for them to do anything outside of gathering together with themselves. They were outlawed from doing any acts of service outside the church. And in less than a generation, the church nearly disappeared. It went underground, most of it, actually. Because people make that connection of you meeting needs and being engaged and serving. So if I don't pick up some pace, we're going to be in trouble here, I know. So let me watch my time. So you are defined by perspective and purpose. I gave you the illustration about the stream last night. So we got that ugly-looking stream, and that's where the world lives. And at the church, we've tried to create this more nice pastoral setting. And, life doesn't look like that, but we'd love for it to look like that. And here's what we've done in the church, I'm afraid, is we look at how bad stuff is, and we just moan and groan and whine about that. And then we still gather together with ourselves. And the truth is, I think God's actually pushing us back out there because that stream isn't going to get better without the church. If God doesn't show up. So here's some characteristics we would give about the church. We believe the community can't be healthy without the church. That without the church, there really can't be health in the community. And the Bible is full of that. You go through the Old Testament, and God was regularly showing up in the city and what he described the city to be like and what he hoped for and what he planned for. And so we believe that if the church isn't a part, it can't be healthy. And so we're regularly asking our city leaders, what are ways that we could help you? What are ways that we could be of service? And I got to tell you, early on, the answer was, well, I can't think of anything. We don't really see the church of value. And today, our city and our schools and our government stuff call us on a regular basis asking for our input. Let me give you a simple illustration on the public schools. And I don't know how it's set up here for you in South Africa, but for us, the public schools, been a lot of concern about where they're going and how they do education and the values they have. And we made a decision not to start a school, have a Christian school, but rather get engaged in the public schools. And I shared a little bit of that last night with you. And we started that in 1995, so quite a while ago now. Today, not only are we providing the mentors for the public school system, but we run some after-school programs for them. We also are involved in some of their teacher training events where we're engaging and interacting with them. 3 years ago, our public schools were getting ready, our school district was getting ready to change its health curriculum and teach more sex ed stuff. And the stuff they were looking at, some of it was phenomenally liberal stuff. I mean, how to teach a third grader to put a condom on a banana, why any lifestyle choice was okay, and there was just a lot of stuff in it. And the superintendent of the school district called and said, hey, Rick, we're getting ready. We've got a panel that's going to review these 5 curriculums. We're going to choose one of them. I was wondering if 1 or 2 people from LifeBridge would be willing to sit in on this panel, which I thought is pretty cool. They're calling the church and asking us to sit in, which I got to tell you never happens in our part of the world. What he didn't know was that 2 other people on the panel went to LifeBridge as well, and so we actually had 3 people on this panel. And I would love to say to you that we were able to keep out all that really liberal agenda stuff, and that would be a lie. That's not true. But today, in our school district, they teach a more moderate one from the really aggressive one they were looking at. And if a parent can choose to have a child opted out of that class. But if you're in that and you take that class, then you also are required to take an abstinence education class that some folks in our church developed and is now going through the public schools system. Did we change everything? No. But were we in the stream enough to at least have a voice? You see, we've lost our ability to speak into the fabric of our community because we've disconnected from our community. That we don't have that connection. Second thing about externally focused churches, they believe that Christians don't grow until they serve. We think that it matters that you are serving somewhere, that you were saved from something for something. You're saved from your sin, from your guilt, from your shame, but it wasn't just to sit around and hope that, you're at church when the Lord comes back. You're saved from something for something. So how do we help the people in our church recognize that God's up to something, that he's doing something in their lives? Go flip up to the next slide. I used it last night, the Ephesians 2, 8, 9, and 10. We really push that hard in our place, that we believe that God has something for you to do, some place for you to be engaged, some place for you to be serving, that there's a part of the story he's inviting you to write. And how are we helping people see that? How are we helping them connect with that and engage with that in their lives? He gave leaders to prepare people for works of service, that the body of Christ would be built. And we've gotten scriptures so that we could be thoroughly equipped, that the body could spur one another on to love and good deeds. And there's spiritual gifts that we would faithfully administer God's grace in its variety of forms, and to do works, that we would be rich in works. And so here's kind of how we've done it. Let me put this chart up here, and I want to show you some things that we've done. We tried to look at that people will do money and things, and they'll do them yearly. If we looked at how our church was for a long time, there was a bulk of people that would get involved in, if we just said, hey, we had a family lose a home and we need to raise some money, people would give some money to that. Or we're going to do a homeless project in our city, or there are some kids at risk in our community and we want to help. And if we could get $10 from every person, just like Pam was asking for earlier in the service, we found people would do that. People would give money. And if we said, hey, we're going to paint somebody's house, or we're going to help do a thing at a retirement center, or we're going to work with some kids on one day on a Saturday, and we would get people to do that. They would do a project kind of thing. And what we've been trying to do is move people from money and things on a yearly basis and move them up and to the right so that there was more engagement for them. So let's flip one more. And we started tracking where people were, where we were trying to shift them, because what we wanted to do was grow their heart in this. Let me give you a quick illustration. There was a guy in our church named Jack Hay. When I met Jack, we were on a community, our mayor in our city put a community-wide task force to deal with underage drinking in our city. Jack was the assistant superintendent of the school district, so he was on this thing. I got invited on this. He went to our mayor and said, what'd you bring that pastor on there for? It was an interesting conversation. It didn't matter what we were talking about in those meetings. Somehow Jack and I would be philosophically on the opposite side of the page. Now, we got along great, but we'd be on the opposite side of the page. We've been doing this for about a year. We had some success in our city with some of the lowering the volume of kids drinking underage. And we were walking out of our meeting one morning, and Jack said, hey, I have no interest in church. I've been to church 2 times, once for a wedding, once for a funeral. I have no interest in going, but my wife wants to go. And I told her, well, if you're going to go to a church, you ought to at least go to that LifeBridge church, because they care about the schools. And so she started showing up, and occasionally Jack would show up with her. And after 5 or 6 months, Lois came to Christ, and Jack was there that weekend. And then Jack started being more regular, and Jack gave his life to Christ. And here's what he said to me. He said, the only Christians I ever met most of my adult life, he's in his 50s, he said, were coming into the schools yelling at me about all the stuff we were doing wrong. And he said, your church messed with me. He said, because I kept seeing you showing up, and you weren't there with an agenda. You were helping kids in our schools, and you were encouraging teachers. And Jack retired 4 years ago, and we have volunteers that lead significant parts of ministry for us, and our community engagement ministry team leader is Jack Hay. See, God does something when we show up. Jack would have never come to us. It would have never happened. He would have never just showed up at our doors for something. There was this relationship thing that happened. And now what we're doing, I've watched Jack's heart grow as he's become more and more. My wife mentors a little fourth grader on Wednesday mornings. It's an hour a week, and she does this. She's been doing this same girl now, third grade and fourth grade. We're in the second year. She knows her family. That family's called and asked for help. We've gotten lots of connection. My wife's invested in this little girl's life, and there is the opportunity. I'm watching my wife, who loves the Lord and loves people, great person, but she's got a huge attachment for this child, and she's helping weekly. If we can move people from giving money and things on occasional basis to where they're involved with people on a regular basis, we will see life change. That's what happens for them. And so how do we move them along that continuum? One of the charts we use to kind of describe what we're doing is this. Every city has needs and dreams. If I were to sit in Stellenbosch and talk to your local leaders, they would tell me things that they want to see happen in the city and what would look good. God has his mandates and desires. The Bible's pretty clear about that. The local church has its callings and capacities, the things that we care about. John Calvin called the needs and dreams of the city and the mandates and desires of God, where they overlapped, he called that the common grace of God. Again, God caring about the city. In the U.S., I don't know how it works here, we've had huge issues about separation of church and state and government control, and it just goes crazy with some of the guidelines that are now being imposed. And so we're never going to win trying to vote in the right number of Christian politicians and all that kind of stuff. What do we care about that God cares about? It's people coming to know Christ. But where's the sweet spot of overlap? It's in service. In other words, there are needs and dreams that your city has, that the local church has some capacity to help meet, and that fit in with the mandates and desires of God. And when we serve, what we've discovered is this, that we've found people coming to Christ as a result of us making a connection with them and serving alongside them. And a huge opportunity for that. We do a lot in the public schools. One of the things we do is help with their facilities. And so we have this annual thing we do. We involve a whole bunch of people in our city, not just our church. The parents and teachers all show up for it. And we'll paint and clean. We'll take huge buildings like this campus here and just do their whole stuff for them. And it takes a lot of volunteers. And it's a good thing. And I was there hanging ceiling tiles. And the custodian, his name is George. He's a Hispanic man. I came up and I needed more tiles. And I said, "Hey, George, where can I get the tiles?" And we're walking along, and he has no idea who I am, and which is a good thing. And as we were walking, he said, "Do you go to that LifeBridge church?" And I said, "Yeah, I do. Sometimes." And then he said, that's interesting. Can I ask you a question? And I said, "Sure." And he said, "Why do you guys do this stuff?" And so I said to him, "George, if you died tonight, do you know where you're going?" No, I didn't actually say that. What I said was, what I did say was, "Well, George, we care about the kids and our and the teachers, and we know you're under-resourced here, and that's why we do this as a church. But let me tell you why I do this personally." I said, "I can be a self-absorbed jerk, and so when I do stuff like this, it helps me not be like that. And God loves me and has extended grace to me, and this is a way for me to help show some of that grace. That's why I do this." And he said, "Oh, that's cool." He didn't know what else to say, I guess. And then as we were walking back, he said, "You know, I told my wife, because we don't go to church. I said, 'Honey, if we go to church, we should go to that church, because they seem to care about people.' Put yourself in the opportunity to get asked. Because 100% of the time, you're going to get asked, 'Who are you and why are you doing this?'" And we do service just for service. Here's what we don't do. We don't do service and then pass out our tracts. We don't do service and wear our T-shirts, the Turn or Burn T-shirts. We don't get the flannel graph presentation of Jesus out afterwards and make them all sit. We just serve. We'll just go in and do whatever that service project is, and watch how God works. And this is that long haul thing I was talking about last night. This is a long haul process for us that we're involved in. I'm sure I've jumped away from anything I have on a slide at this point. Let's just flip through these next ones like really fast, because we want to give everybody an opportunity, so we expose them. We start with easy entry stuff. Someone can come and help paint a school or clean up a schoolyard or mow weeds for somebody. We do some real, anybody could do this. And then we try to move it up another notch to where there's an experience, where there's several times they're involved in this, and there's a bit of a heart change, ultimately so that we can get to where they're really engaged, where there's this continuous engagement, and they're recruiting others. And so we kind of try to help people through that process. So we do 2 or 3 annual events that are church-wide events that we do. And we encourage everybody to sign up and be a part of that. And we'll get a lot of people to do that. And then they figure out, well, hey, that wasn't so bad. Maybe I could do something else. And then we have other things where there's an ongoing basis. And then there's some where there's a much higher level of commitment, this mentoring that's going on, the stuff we're doing with single moms, the at-risk kids that we're involved with, the gang task force stuff that we're doing in our city. Those are much more substantive and require a whole lot more layering. But what I've watched is people make those steps, because I'm convinced we don't grow until we serve. If what I do is come and participate and sit in here and sit in here. I was speaking at a conference in Virginia in the eastern United States, and they wanted to take me to some old farmstead restaurant thing. It was like, George Washington, our first president, like ate there or something like that. And so we get there, and they brought the food, and the food was phenomenal. I'm kind of a comfort food person, so they just layered it on. And they kept bringing food. And to the point where I'd eat a bite and have to take a sip of water. It was that full, and I was trying to be polite, and I was all done. When we were like, I was like, please just take me back to the hotel. It's really what I was thinking, not saying. And then they brought desserts. And they wanted me to try every one of their desserts that they did this restaurant. So I forced myself into that. But I was to the point where I just wanted to huck up a lung at that point. I mean, I just was so. That happens in church. If all I do is come and feed and feed and feed and feed, then I end up having to puke on somebody. And usually it's pastors and stuff. You know what I don't like about this church is, But what if we gathered to connect with God and be inspired about what people are doing around us and serving, and then what if we scattered and had what we got that week squeezed back out of us? What would happen if we could engage people that way? Because if all we're going to do, there's a difference, and I didn't say this last night when I put up the picture of that sheep that had all the, there's a difference between a church growing and a church getting fat. And a growing church is one that is engaged in the fabric of its community and seeing people with some real change in their lives. So we also believe they're evangelistically effective. Let me flip forward to the next chart. They understand the power of service and that it creates an opportunity for a question. But here's what we say about being evangelistically effective. I was in church one weekend, and a guy came up to me, and he said, I need a prayer. And I thought what he meant was he wanted me to pray for him. Regularly in our lobby, someone will come out and say, hey, we're having trouble with our marriage or something. And I'll say, how about if I just pray with you? And we'll stop and pray in the lobby. And I thought he'd seen me doing that. And so I said, well, what can I pray for you for? What do you need me to pray about? He said, I don't need prayer for me. I need a prayer. I need you to write one down and give it to me. Well, now he had my attention. So I said to him, what do you need that for? And he said, well, yesterday I was at the in-between. The in-between is a transitional housing unit that helps people coming out of prison or other big deal issues in their life, and they get housing and some mentoring and they get some job training. And our church started down there by cleaning up apartments and doing things, and now we do provide job training and mentoring and child care and a whole bunch of other stuff there. But this guy is a trim carpenter, and he said they needed some help, and so my wife volunteered for me to do this, and that sounds like mine. And I was down there helping, and we got talking about church on our break, I guess, and one of the guys who lives there says, oh, dude, you go to church? My life is really screwed up. I need somebody to pray for me. And This guy said to him, "Oh man, I don't know how to pray, but I'll get one and I'll be back." So now here he is on Sunday morning asking me to write a prayer down for him. And so I got a few minutes to talk to him about, I didn't need to write a prayer. He already had one. Let me just help you give voice to it. And God wants to hear your heart. And here's what prayer is. And guess who's probably paying attention the next time I'm talking about prayer in church, or went over to our bookstore and bought a book on prayer. And here's a guy who got asked and he didn't know how to give an answer. But I guarantee you that if he continued on that journey, which this guy has actually, he grew enough to give his own answer. He didn't need some pastor to come and explain this Jesus thing to somebody. You see, the point is, how do we help them get engaged at a relational level? Because here's an interesting question. You remember what Paul said to Timothy? Always be prepared to give an answer when someone asks. You remember that? Who's asking you? Is anybody asking you? If nobody's asking you, then you should ask this question. Why? See, we're great at telling. We're great at standing and shouting. But is anybody asking about the hope we have in us? And if they're not asking, how come? And so for us as a church, it was get in that pool and try to be engaged and try to find ways for us to be making a difference in people's lives. Let's go ahead and jump ahead, John, to that chart. Or are we past that already? Great. Let me get all the way, keep going. If you'll just these are good questions to ask about how can you use what you currently have. And it doesn't matter the size of the church. It doesn't matter, everyone thinks, when I talk about what we're doing, we've got 300 mentors. But I got to tell you, when we started this, I started with just a handful of people that wanted to do this. We didn't do a campaign. We didn't ask for a big shift in the life of our church. There were already people who cared about some of this stuff, and we started. And then we started telling stories. And we don't tell just the good stories. We'll tell the story about a family who adopted a kid and how that went so well for them. And then the next person up is telling, man, we did this, and the kid was abusive, and it almost took our home apart. And because I want people to know this isn't for everybody. But our encouragement is to tell the stories about what God is doing and let people connect to those stories. And we've grown this into the DNA of our church, to the place where it seems just kind of natural to us for us to be engaged in these things. So how can we use prayer to be the best community for a church? How do we use our people to be the best church for our community? How do we use our facilities to be the best church for our community? If you think in terms of the resources you already have, if you are asking the question, how would this be best for our community, you're going to get a different set of answers than if you're asking the question, how is this best for our local congregation? And I would simply suggest that you start asking the question, because it might drive you and push you to some things. You don't have to do all of it. So one of the ways we looked at our facilities, we said, we have church in here and we're busy and there's a lot going on, but you look at a lot of church facilities and they sit empty. And so we use ours through the week for some ministry things that are going on and a lot of events. But last year in 2011, we had 1,400 events by 830 other groups in our city that used our facility. And it just gave us a chance to serve that way, to make a connection with them. We ask every ministry area in the life of our church to do something externally focused. So our children's do stuff, our seniors do stuff, our kids, high school students do things. We ask for every staff member in the life of our church and every one of our leaders, our volunteer leaders, to be doing something externally focused. So find a way where you're volunteering somewhere or doing something that's outside of the church. Because ultimately, I want our church and our people to be in a place where people are asking them. And if all we do is talk to each other, if all we're doing is connecting with each other, we might grow, but will we really see anything transformative happen in our communities? And ultimately for us, we've been pushing toward transformations in our city. John, I have no idea where to go from here, but flip toward the one that says church and kingdom. Thanks. I know these guys have been great back here because I've been messing with them. So here are just some differences that I think when I think in terms of local church or I think in kingdom. In local church, I'm thinking about the local church right here. Kingdom, it's more global. Church, it's internal. Kingdom, it's external. Church, it's about propositional truth. In the kingdom, it's more about God's narrative story. The church tends to be exclusive. The kingdom, more inclusive. I said this last night. In the church, evangelism is the goal. In the kingdom, evangelism is the starting point. And we talk about sacred versus secular. You know who did that? We did that. The church did that. The church defined some things that were sacred and some things that were secular. And I don't think God ever set it up that way. Because what do we do to folks? We say to them, hey, come to church and serve somewhere and get involved in a small group. And those things are the sacred things. And then you've got your job, and then you've got your hobbies, and those are secular things. Well, what if I could get guys playing softball to see it as a kingdom thing? What if somehow when I showed up at work today, I was worshiping God with the best of my effort, and that was a kingdom thing? What if I was paying attention to the person who works down the hall from me or across the cubicle, and I saw it as a kingdom thing? What if when I'm volunteering as a Little League coach, and I got those 10 or 12 8-year-old boys that were coaching, and what if I saw that as the God thing, a kingdom thing for me? What if I just raised the bar up? Instead of making things sacred and secular, what if they were all sacred to God? Because didn't God say that He was going to renew all creation? There's a lot of garbage out there. I get that. But what if we were to have a kingdom perspective? Bob Moffat wrote a book that was a great book for us to read in the U.S. It was this title, If Jesus Were Mayor of Your City. I don't know, what would be, give me a, mayor? Oh, awesome. Because that makes sense. We've stolen everything in the U.S. from somewhere else. So, if Jesus were mayor of Stellenbosch or Joburg or Cape Town, what would that look like? Would anything be different, do you think, if Jesus were mayor? I know it would be in my city. Who's married to the mayor? The church, if Jesus were mayor. My push, my encouragement, isn't for you to change everything you're doing. It's just, I know this stream rushing by your front door, and I'm just encouraging the church to show up in that stream. Because there are real needs and real stuff and real issues.